Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot do another cold open yet again. Because
I just want to say I made just the most fantastic joke.
Liz made the most vile joke in this show's history.
That was very clever.
It checked nearly every box.
It even
except
caught
for racism.
It caught you off guard and took you a second, and then you couldn't believe it.
That floored me. Yeah,
and no one is ever going to hear it
unless you join our new tier, where you only get to hear Liz say what she just said, but you can never tell anybody. Because I can't even tell. I can't even like call a friend after this and be like, look at what Liz said on the show. No, because A, they wouldn't get it. But B, it was a vile thing to say, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Come in. Jeffrey Epstein.
What's up, y'all? This is Bobby Blood and Soil, hitting you up from Ukraine here. I have with me Lilith Fair. What?
Oh my God!
Where was I going with that?
I don't know. Hello,
was
everyone.
Lilith Fair an actual person?
No, it was the
that
Lilith
was just
Fair.
The fair.
It was just the name of the fair.
I thought that was like
it was
some
the fair of Liliths.
Bra. I thought that was like a Kate. What's the shit you like? Kate something?
Kate Bush?
Kate Bush. I just assumed Lilith Fair was like some like lady like Kate
Stop
Bush.
Stop saying it like that. It's Lilith Fair.
Lilith Fair.
Oh my God.
Lilith Fair. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Liz. I almost said I'm Lilith Fair.
Yo, what up? I'm Brace. Yo. Hey, what's up? No, I am, I'm Brace. We have with us here. No, we have our producer, Young Chomsky, here.
I was just going to say that. But you are listening to TrueAnon. And like we said in the previous episode, which actually, spoiler alert, was just a couple minutes ago that we recorded that very statement. Mm-hmm. We have been podcasting for 3 hours because we are giving you what the people want, which is everything you wanted to know about Ukraine and Russia, but we're too bored and stupid to ask.
Also, Liz, it's been technically almost 4 hours.
Well, let's get to it.
Hello and welcome to the Jamestown Foundation's Understanding the World podcast. We have with us today here Deputy Undersecretary of State for Namibia, Liz Franzak. And of course, we have with us today Lord of the Cossack Host, Mark Ames. We'll be discussing whether the vile Slav should be annihilated. No, let me try that again.
No. It's good.
That's a keep.
All right. Listen, Mark, we talked about Ukraine in the first episode. My question for this one is, riddle me this. Can I become a Cossack?
I'm not sure about that.
It's like a state of mind.
Yeah. I mean, but do you have horns in your head? If you were to feel the top of your head there.
Is that good or bad?
Because that's what they're going to do. That's bad.
I have one, but I got it planted. It was like a Burning Man thing. I got it put there. I was doing some work with Marilyn Manson, and I can get it taken out. So we left off with the maiden protest where Ukraine were protesting over women in that country being too pretty.
The maiden protest. I was like, what?
I mean, it was kind of odd for us to we were saying in our little break that it was a little abrupt for us to end right at the kind of like the peak of Maidan, and this kind of big war is about to break out, or spoiler alert, does break out. But this kind of sets the stage. I think probably there's a lot of context that you need for understanding the current quote unquote crisis, if it is a crisis, in Ukraine and Russia, the situation with Ukraine and Russia, like 2014 and the Maidan revolution, the Maidan coup, like really is like crucial context for understanding like what the fuck is going on right now. and the people that come to power at the behest of the West.
Rapping Liz, making her comeback.
Kind of like after this coup,
Spitting rhymes,
you know, gets set into motion. So, okay. Like brutal war, basically civil war breaks out. I don't know, terrorist, civil war, however we want to call it.
I think it's technically a police action because they say that there's not a civil war. There's just a terrorist zone in the east.
I think they called it ATO, basically anti-terrorist operation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And everyone at the time had convinced themselves that there was nothing organic about it. That Russian agents, and again, I'm sure there's a kernel of truth to this, you know, it filtered in, and there were actually no pro-Russian separatists there whatsoever, and everyone just like forgot all history. That's why I kind of wanted to go in the previous episode back and forth to how like the pro-Russian, how the country keeps going back and forth between a pro-Russian guy and a Western guy, and the Western people and the pro-Western side never can really handle if the Russian side wins, you know, however they win. They always like have some revolution eventually.
Yeah.
Well, there's just a strong segment of the Ukrainian like people who are very pro-Russia. I mean, it just
there
is
that.
Like, you know.
And there's a bigger part that doesn't give a shit and doesn't want problems. I'd say that's a much bigger part that just doesn't want problems. Well, you know, their lives have sucked, and they were actually under Yanukovych, despite how unpopular he was, despite how corrupt he was, incomes were actually going up, and they were getting close to where they were in 1990, 91 for the first time. Then this thing happens, and just the floor fell out again, you know, because certain types of people love a war, and certain types of people benefited from it. And like, you know, we talked about it before. I mean, who backs... whether it's a broadly, you know, popular-ish color revolution or a much less popular one like the Maidan one, who backs it? I mean, who kind of benefits? Oligarchs who want to be connected to international capital, local like liberal elites in the NGO world, and who are cued into that world. And then ultranationalist, fascists, whatever you want to call them, who had been built up. And those three groups have benefited the most, and the masses of people there have really suffered, and the country's being like practically depopulated. It really sucks. And then there are parts like Crimea, definitely, and you know, parts of Donbass, Donetsk that are just straight up would have rather been with Russia. And have old historic ties with Russia and have seen how wealthy Russia is. You know, there's that line that you see on social media. You see people like former Ambassador McFall and all these other, you know, disinfo warriors.
Ambassador McPhail.
Oh, McFuck. You know, I'm sorry. Do you know the McFuck story?
No.
But wait, say, what is it?
Yes, I have to say it. When he was ambassador, he's like trying to show he's hip with the liberal kids, and the liberal kids like to, you know, speak in Mott and Russian or like slang a lot, right? But he didn't know it, but he's like, hey, liberal kids, I'm down with you. And I guess he had heard somewhere that Yekaterinburg can be shortened to Yoburg, but Yob means fuck. So whoever like is probably some liberal Moscow snobs call Yekaterinburg Yoburg, which just means fuckburg. Yeah. And he's like on Twitter, no, привет, I'm going, еду в Yoburg, za что-то. He's like all cheery and happy, like golden retriever guy. And everyone's like, some Russian guy's like, T some Yoburg McFuck, like you yourself are fuckberg McFuck. Like everyone just couldn't believe the ambassador had called like the third largest city in the country fuckberg.
That's like someone being like the Chinese ambassador being like, I'm going to Schittsburg this weekend to check out some smokestacks.
It's pretty damn funny. So that's McFall. But you know, these guys, they published, I mean, they flood the information space with whatever homily of the day is. And one of them is, and you've probably seen this, Putin's not afraid of NATO expansion. What he's afraid of is a thriving democracy on his
borders.
Yes,
that's what really gets him quaking in his boots.
This is actually a huge talking point with some of the worst motherfuckers on earth, is that they always say that Putin's not afraid of NATO expansion. Now, I don't know if they think that Putin's like I don't know what and that it's always like the liberalizing of countries near him. No, he's definitely afraid of NATO expansion.
Yes.
If you look at a map of Russia and then you look at a map of NATO countries, NATO has expanded to the border of, I mean, it's been on the border of Russia since Turkey joined in the 50s, but NATO has expanded to the not just that little border of Russia, the Caucasus down there, but like to the actual border of Russia. You know, in Europe, you know, with the Baltics. And it's like,
it's such obviously,
no shit, he's afraid of that.
It's like so obviously bullshit. And this isn't just Putin. This is most Russian liberals, I think, don't want.
Right.
They would like to see Ukraine actually be a thriving democracy, but it's not. It's such a shithole that it's turned off a lot of Russian liberals. Yeah. But they definitely don't want to see Ukraine join NATO and be enemies, a hostile country.
America almost started a nuclear fucking war over some missile station in Cuba. Yeah. And yet we have added.
We were scared of socialism. That was it. We were scared of socialism.
We were scared of we were afraid. You know, I mean, kind of, but like
it
is just so ridiculous that like that talking point of he's not afraid of NATO. He's definitely afraid of NATO.
It's not. I mean, fear maybe, but also it's like there's a betrayal element there that I want to talk about, because this is like a really important context to understand, which is that the West. Okay, so we have to go back a little bit.
Yes.
But during the talks about the unification of Germany, right? So this
should have happened.
Yeah, it shouldn't have happened. But this is, before the fall of the Soviet Union. So, there's all these, all these kind of, big diplomatic talks about we want to unify Germany, how is this going to happen? We want Germany in NATO. We want to unify Germany in NATO. And basically the Soviet Union, Gorbachev at the time, is like, okay, we will agree to that if we have assurances that NATO will not expand to the east, right? This is like the last stand. And I mean, this is like, this isn't just a wink. It's not just that the West gives them a wink, wink. Like this was like assured from Bush to James Baker to
not 1 inch.
Not 1 inch. Genscher, who is at the time the vice chancellor of Germany, he literally said, this was a quote, this back in 2017, a bunch of documents were declassified that were kind of had all these notes detailing this process and the unification of Germany and the, its ascent into NATO. And this was a quote from Genscher at the time, quote, "The Russians must have some assurance that if, for example, the Polish government left the Warsaw Pact one day, they would not join NATO the next." Now, that's quite literally what happened.
Well, it was more than one day.
But yeah.
I mean, that's the insane thing. But the problem is that all of the Americans basically began denying this very quickly.
Yeah,
that this conversation ever happened.
Yeah, and it was just, it's not just that it happened. I mean, it happened like for months and by multiple people giving the Germans, the Russians and the Soviets like explicit assurance. And it was the only reason they agreed to unify Germany, right? Yeah. And so they
had 350,000 troops in Germany.
Yes.
At the time, and I look, I'm one of the benefits, if you can call that, of being old is that, I remember this stuff. It was so out in the open at the time in sort of news, popular culture. We're giving them assurances. NATO's not going to expand east. Like you have to start editing your own memory of what actually happened to believe it. And it's pretty scary,
Well, you'll find a lot in the American diplomatic establishment now who say that did not happen. That these are all misinterpretations of like offhanded comments or something like that, which is absolutely ridiculous because this would be at the forefront of these negotiations. I mean, not that Gorbachev, as we said, was a very smart guy.
He was ready to give everything away.
Yeah.
He really was. And in fact, I think it was more the West, Baker and Genscher and Kohl and Bush and some of them assuring Gorbachev than Gorbachev himself, who was almost too shy to demand it. So they were saying the things they knew Gorbachev needed to hear.
Yeah.
And then Gorbachev would then be able to tell this over and over to his generals and so on, that it's okay. But it's a joke.
Yeah. So it's like it's not just that like because we can talk about military stuff later, but like, I don't think it's just like fear of NATO being on the border. Although, yeah, you don't want those military. I mean, imagine if Russia was doing military exercises in Canada. It would be it would be. I mean, it would be chaos in America. It would. And so that's been going on for decades, right? For Russia, or a decade or so, but it's like a deep betrayal. And I think that this might be just before we get into kind of post-Maidan Ukrainian history leading up to what's going on today, like a good pause to talk a little bit about Putin, because not to get like, I don't know, I think it sounds like really like dorky, like an international relations person being like the mind of the Eastern, I don't mean it like that.
What is Putin thinking?
Yeah, what does he think? When you look into his eyes, do you see his soul?
He's like, gay, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, yeah. But I do think that the Western betrayal of Russia like plays so much into his orientation towards America and the West and the Europe and the continent, to get all, fancy international relations. I'll call it the continent. But so you have this. And, and Mark, when you were on the show last time, we spent so much time talking about the destruction of Russia by the West in the late 90s. And this is when, that was Putin's time, right? Yeah. And so you have this like very like, intense military, like international diplomatic betrayal. And people have to understand that like Russia, the Soviet Union is a fucking power player, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like it's, the West treats Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union as its little plaything, as a fucking like a joke, as a toy.
Yeah.
And, after the market crashes in the late 90s and the whole country is fucking gutted and the ruble is decimated and Russia really has to rebuild itself, and it has in very interesting ways. What Putin has done some really, pretty wild stuff. It was like so much of it is about deep Russian /Soviet pride in country and history. And the Russians are very proud. I mean, you hear it when you hear Russian diplomats talking about how angry it makes them the way Americans talk about World War II. I mean, you hear it over and over again on any kind of any kind of World War II memorial, like where Russians speak, they always hit the talking point that the Americans teach that the Russians were not involved in the liberation of Europe. And like, it is like a deep betrayal, right? This is a very, very old country with a very, very rich history. I mean, fucking millions of people died in World War II. It's such a horrible slap in the face with the West, how the West acts to this country. And so they're reneging on their pledge about NATO not expanding, coupled with the way that they just fucking destroyed the Russia after the fall, after the Union fell, is like, I mean, it explains so much about the psychology behind their orientation towards the West.
Yeah, and Putin would have that wound and memory pretty raw because, as we said, he came up in the 90s, his whole rise to power, and it wasn't like a straight line. Rise to power was witnessing it, being part of it, and understanding the what weakness really means.
Yeah.
And the US took full advantage of its absolute dominant, place in the relationship in every way possible. NATO enlargement was, if you go back through the record, even sort of through the kind of establishment record of should we or should we not expand NATO, it was debated a lot. There were a lot
even in
of
the
people,
US.
In the US, I mean, of course,
there were
in Russia,
generals who were like, "You don't do this."
I mean, Kennan was against it. Kissinger, I believe, was against it. Like
the thing is, even for just basic reasons of like logistics and overstretching, because NATO is America in large part, and like overstretching America's commitments. I mean, it's a very real thing. Like even just taking from the American point of view, it's not a great idea.
I mean, a lot, like the New York Times and the kind of the liberal part of the establishment, they sort of couldn't believe that we'd be that much of dicks. Really, like you can even see some editorials. And there was a time when the New York Times, because it seemed so much like there was end of history and America was going to fully dominate for at least 100 years. And Russia was such a basket case. And that must mean it's forever going to be a basket case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did even some investigative articles on it. I mean, the guy who was in charge of pushing for NATO expansion, like the sort of the lobbying effort for it, was a Republican operative named Bruce Jackson, who was also like a Lockheed executive. You may remember Bruce Jackson led what was like the Committee to Liberate Iraq in the early 2000s. I mean, he was like the guy that set it up and the chairman of it. He's the guy that, set up the Committee to Expand NATO or whatever the hell it was called. I mean, he was the major player, and it was, it's not like there were street protests in America over it. I just think people kind of thought, well, that would be a dickish move, but whatever. What are the consequences? What's Russia going to do? That was kind of the attitude. And it happened and it humiliated Russia a lot. Even Yeltsin, who was, our asset, was pissed.
A humiliated man to begin with.
Yes, very much. The insulted and humiliated or whatever that Dostoevsky book is. But the event that I think really galvanized that and changed things forever from the Russian side, for Americans seen much differently, was that NATO was expanded, and almost at the same time, and then it was formalized, and almost at the same time, they started this defensive. We're just a defensive organization.
Yes,
bombed an independent sovereign country, Serbia, and carved out a new nation out of it, right? And we could say all kinds of bad things about Milosevic, and it's true, and what the Kosovars were going through, whatever. But this was an ally of Russia's. The U.S. has any number of human rights abusing dictator bad people, as allies that we sell weapons to. So that's not the principle here. The principle was NATO needs a mission, and its mission, and then they gave it a mission, and it went and it attacked and destroyed one of Russia's last friends. Without Russian input, they tried stopping it and they couldn't. We were just like, you're not a player here. We give you IMF loans and we let you steal all your money and park it in our bank. Shut up. They couldn't do anything. And I think, one thing Putin learned from that, I mean, there's an argument made by some people, especially some people in kind of the spook community, that war led to an actual kind of intelligence community coup in Russia. I mean, Yeltsin got rid of, I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's essentially like a coup. After that, there was just no argument anymore within Russia. It was, even like totally pro-Western people were just so shocked that the worst things that the nationalists and the extreme left and right were saying in Russia about NATO and about the West turned out to be truer than they could have imagined. Yeah. Like it was like bombing, it would be like us being weak and then Russia bombed. What's the closest country to the U.S.? Israel? Or Canada? I don't know. One of those two. And that moment, like Putin and not just Putin, but everybody in that kind of elite understood either we're just like totally fucked as a country, and that's that. Or if you want to advance any of ultimately you can't even advance even your own personal interests much without just, you just can't do anything. And they realized that they needed to become powerful. They couldn't do anything. They had to shut up. So like when the U.S. in 2001, we asked for, over like base rights in Central Asia and asked Putin, is that cool? And he's like, yeah. And then we said about 6 months later, we're going to stay here. And then like 6 months after that, we decided we were going to put Green Berets right on Georgia on the border with Russia. And it's just like, and Putin didn't say much about it because they were weak. Yeah. And they knew they had to actually get stronger if you ever want to do anything. And
and they have. I mean, that's like that's
and
another
it's hard
thing.
to deal with.
Talking about American propaganda, I think people listening who maybe haven't, read about a lot of this stuff or don't know a lot of this history, even recent history, like would be shocked to hear maybe. But like Russia is you mentioned wealthy. They're a very wealthy, very, they have an insane, high in demand exports. They manufacture almost everything for themselves, for their people. They have massive currency reserves, massive gold reserves. Yeah. So right now, for example, like, the market is like not doing so well in Russia, but that's okay. They can they can do a lot. The central bank can do a lot because they have these massive currency reserves. They can devalue their currency if they need to. They can make a lot of moves that other countries can't. They have their military, which we can talk about, is quite strong. It's very different from the 2001 that you're saying, Putin saying we're not strong, we can't say no to the US moving in and building these bases or having these presences. Like the Russian military has made incredible advancements in technology and they have a very different kind of, at least my understanding, a very different kind of strategic outlook and different kind of approach to war than the US, and kind of like a different set of generals and which we don't have to get into in ideology.
The US just wants to invade everybody and assume everything will go well. And Russia's not. Yeah.
Well, there was a major Russian reorganization of their military in 2000. I mean, I don't. The Russian military was pretty. I mean, as we can see, Ukraine's
awful shape in the 90s. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like
Ukraine's military is still like not really reformed enough, but like they were basically along old Soviet lines, which was not like. It was not conducive to modern warfare, and they did a lot of reorganizations in after Georgia in 2008.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but I always like to say that the American military is basically like muscle bound, where it's like a big, strong, like the Predator drone is such a like perfect symbol of like the American military, which is like it's expensive, it's flashy, it looks great on YouTube. But it's like lumbering and could get shot down really easily.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like for like a year, it looks like the greatest new technology, but it like can be pretty easily like thwarted and weaponized back against the US very easily, and has been, kind of since its debut. And the Russian military and their approach is like, I would say, at least from what I've read, way more dynamic, a lot more nimble. It has a very different approach. At least in terms of how it would look at a possible, like, war with the US, which hopefully never, ever happens.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to say about the Russian military, too, look, they were in the doldrums in the 90s, massively corrupt, lost in the first Chechen war. The Chechens, you don't want to get all Orientalists and so on, but I think most Chechens would agree. They're genuinely amazing fighters. And they had help. Turkish intelligence, I'm sure, Qatar, Saudis, and their buddies in Langley, I'm sure, gave them a little. Like I know some stories, but it's for another episode. And they lost the first one badly. But they also learned a lot, because if you don't die after a war like that completely, you've learned a lot. You've trained against the fiercest fighters, pound for pound, in the world. And the second war. Leaving aside all the issues of human rights and who deserves sovereignty and so on, I mean, I have a huge amount of respect for Chechens after everything I've seen. But like, nevertheless, there's no doubt the Russians were way smarter in the second war, and they won ugly, but they learned a lot. It was clear, and I think that's one of the first things that kind of scared the West about. The Putin didn't drink, that was the first problem. Right. And the second problem is like, wait, he did this war rather smartly. Like under Yeltsin, they sent all of their armored personnel carriers right into downtown Grozny. And all of a sudden, just slaughtered all of them with RPGs.
And their armored personnel carriers are not, let's just say they don't have the same designer as their tanks. They're not quite as good. Right. The BMP is a pretty rough vehicle.
Yep. Yes, I've actually driven in one through Georgia. During that war, when I reported, it was bumpy. It was probably a better one, but
used the turret of one, but it wasn't on one. It was on a different kind. It had been put on a different vehicle. But yeah, I mean, the Russians, like the thing is, like they're not afraid to fight. They're not afraid to win dirty. They'll do it. You know what I mean? Like they will. I mean, America will too, but there's this sort of America will absolutely, like they'll fight as dirty as you can get. But the Russians, I think, do it more effectively.
Because they don't have America is like the profligate billionaire's junkie son. I mean, totally. It just keeps going. Who just keeps blowing everything, but the family still has tons of money to blow so that his son that he had with, a hooker or something was also going to get a bunch of money and blow that. And so we can still, exactly. Eventually, I mean, the decline it's like this cliche thing and it's very real too. Eventually it's going to mean less and less and less power, but Russia got the current crop of leaders came up at a time when Russian power was at its absolute nadir. So they have to be careful, really careful, and not stupid and profligate about how they expend their hard power, especially with Syria, they waited and waited and waited until it was an absolutely opportune moment. And so they did the best they could do with their circumstances. And I think I got to admit, I have a hard time still wrapping my head around the fact that the Russia of today is nothing at all like the Russia of the 90s. Yeah. I know it, I get it. Russia looks so much different and looks so much better. Yeah. And that's because one thing Putin did, for all the corruption, whatever, the difference is he has made rich people pay taxes. And that's kind of the difference between a state that works and one that doesn't. If rich people don't pay taxes, everything falls apart. If they do pay taxes, you can build shit. I agree. It's a different military. And I think that, people in Washington, in think tank land, in foreign policy land, they just can't accept it. They can't accept it at all. It's like what Obama said when he was all angry about the whole, when he kind of launched Russiagate just before he left office. Yeah. And he said, what do the Russians make? Russia's a pathetic country. They just make Kalashnikovs and vodka. And
guess what? Two of the most popular things in the world, moron. Kalashnikovs and vodka. No one's drinking a fucking Fat Tire beer at 6 a.m. They're drinking vodka. Yep. A child isn't shooting. His child isn't shooting like a Knight's Armament AR. They're shooting an AK.
AKs, everybody.
They're popular.
Yeah. But as a Russian hearing that, imagine how insulted you would be for Putin to hear that from fucking Obama. I mean, again, this is why Trump was his match, because he doesn't drink as well. So neither of that. It's checkmate.
So yeah.
No, just kidding.
Yeah, but it's bitch presidents.
Yeah, they're trying to outgay each other.
Yeah. No, I don't do coke either. I never done ecstasy.
But it's like an insult like that after all of the shit that they've been building over the for the past 2 decades and trying to rebuild their country after we destroyed their country and their economy. It's just it's unacceptable. And so when you read kind of now, I mean, we need to kind of flip back now to Ukraine. Yeah. Before we kind of catch up to present day. But I will say, when you read statements from guys like Lavrov, or you read Putin's statements, you see the absolute disdain for the West. But it's not just disdain. It's they do not respect America.
Yes. Yeah. That's
they
a good way of putting
respect America for as much as they have to at the UN to get by, but there is nothing about American culture. There's nothing about American diplomats. There's nothing about American education or the American way
bullshit.
Of life.
The American bullshit doesn't wow
there's
them.
Nothing about any kind, which they view America as a young, adolescent, just childlike nation, and they don't respect it.
I think they also view America as in denial.
Totally wrong. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just in denial. And at some points, it's sort of how do we deal with this? Yeah. Because it's also, I mean, America is dangerous. America is very powerful, has all this weapons, military weapons. Some of them don't fly, but whatever. Another $1 trillion.
Listen, major financial weapons.
Yes, exactly. So we have all these weapons, and it is a declining power, and it is dangerous, especially when you have a ruling elite that just cannot and will not come to grips with that. So they're going to make some stupid choices and stupid decisions and policies, like what they've done in Ukraine, for example, which, I mean, I guess we'll get to.
Look at that pivot back. Look at that. This is how you know.
This is a pro.
Listen, as a podcaster, in all seriousness, I just want to say, anyway.
Well, so that's to say, all right, so Russia has bases in Ukraine. By the time the Maidan Revolution happens, so you guys might know, there's this little fucking sea called the Black Sea, right up there above Turkey. I don't know who made this sea. Totally pointless sea. Because unless you're selling your little tramp freighter from Istanbul to Odessa, no reason for it. They could just pave it over and put a whole new country. Russia has bases on that sea. That gives them access to the Mediterranean. But, the Black Sea is a pretty big area in its own right. And they're leasing this naval base. They've been leasing this naval base. They just re-signed a contract. So Maidan happens, and there is a lot of questions about what is going to happen with these bases on the Black Sea.
Honestly, if you ask me, I haven't seen anybody look into this too much. But if you ask me, I think the nationalists and even the West understood. I don't think they understood. Okay, they thought that when this revolution happened, there was a lot of open gloating by the neocon crowd. I think by the head of the NED, if I remember right, by like the Stratfor crowd. They're like, that's it, Russia's done.
Yeah.
And then Putin took Crimea. And, so a lot of people actually didn't think about that. I think they thought that was going to be an ongoing point of contention that was going to pin Russia down.
Like some diplomatic, pawn to be thrown back and forth.
Subversion and this and that. And it was just going to go on and on and on. They just took it because it was, and again, they're not stupid. They didn't try and take all this talk that's been going on here in the last 2 months of a World War II style invasion and installing a puppet like the Nazis would do is
ridiculous.
Stupid that anyone would believe that. It's unbelievable. Yeah. They're not fucking stupid like we are, and they can't afford to be.
That would be it. It would be one of the most insane things if it happens. I will. No, I'm not going to. No, because that means I'll make it happen.
It just won't. It won't happen.
Just won't happen.
It won't happen. It's not even in the realm of possibility.
It would be too. It would make Afghanistan look like, I don't know what doesn't look like. Everything kind of looks like Afghanistan. I'm trying to think of a military adventure that
it'd
worked.
Probably be more Iraq. They probably would sweep in at first. All the bitch Nazis would go running, to Galicia, and then they'd start coming back, and you'd have, all these. We have endless stories about these Ukrainian oath keepers and their sniper rifles.
Exactly. I mean, that it would be just a civil war that Russia would have to. It would just be another Afghanistan, Iraq. It would be insane for them to do
absurd
it on their border.
Yeah. No. Why would they? Why would they? I mean, actually, it's something we would probably want, which is why you see the West just slobbering.
That's
over
what I think they want them to do that.
Totally.
Very clearly. Yeah.
So before we get into today, back in 2014, he takes Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
Poroshenko's elected in Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. There's all these. We should talk about kind of the players in Ukraine a little bit. There's a massive kind of let's say glow up for the oligarch community in this moment.
Excuse me, you mean the founders of the nation, the liberal Democrats that are their answer to George Washington?
No,
and just some of the roughest dudes are having the best time of their life, and really selling off. Like I said, this is when the mass sell-off begins, or not begins, but really crescendos in Ukraine.
They try.
Farmland. They're
trying again. Well, they can't. They're still trying to get those laws passed with heavy U.S. and EU backing.
Yeah,
they're still having a hard time with it. Even Zelensky, when he first took over, the first thing he tried to do was privatize land in the West. And the Ukrainians are like, yeah, we want to be free market. We want to be there, but blood and soil. Are you going to sell my blood next?
Yeah.
Zelensky Jew, So they're kind of they're a little freaked out about it. But they're trying to, and they're like pilot programs and all this stuff. And the West definitely wants it. But I would say this about also to keep in mind about what happened in like March, April, whatever of 2014, right after the Maidan coup and the new people took over. So yeah, they put oligarchs in as governors. They were just installed as governors, like Ihor Kolomoisky, probably the most famous one. He actually eventually put Zelensky in power. He's a dual citizen, I believe. Brace, can you name the country that he's a dual citizen of? You're a member of the tribe. Come on.
I know it. I know. What other country are people fucking dual citizens of, dude? I know. I mean, there's only one country that anyone ever. No one's like, oh yeah, he's a dual citizen of, Canada and fucking Botswana. No, duh.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anything.
No, it doesn't, except for the fact that he also financed a lot of the Nazi militia groups.
Yeah. Well, here, Israel themselves, I'm sorry, some of these Nazi militants have fucking Tavor rifles. The Israeli army rifle. Like, it's not like Israel does not give a fuck. I think it was the right sector dude who literally met with Israel's foreign ambassador to Ukraine to be like, oh no, dude, we don't hate Jews.
We're pro-Jewish. That's all they say. Oh no, we're pro-Jewish. It's only gypsies we hate.
And the thing is, it's true. Like, they can drop these things as, I mean, I still wouldn't want to be a Jew in Ukraine, but like, I don't think that hating Jews is the number one thing. I think it's an important part of their cultural heritage. But I don't think it's like for a lot of these groups, like the most important thing. No, like they hate Russians. They hate gypsies. They might hate the idea of the international Jew, even as they take money from them.
Like a globalist.
Yeah, the globalist, like this vague sort of like other out there. But even it's not. Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's like, that's a big mistake that people make in thinking that they're exactly like the Nazis or whatever in the 40s. It's different.
Right. It's not
unless
like
you're a gypsy.
The single wedge issue, but they all know, and it's so open, in other forums when it's like they're not just talking to, I don't know, Western journalist or the Israeli ambassador. It's like, there's kikes, blah, blah, blah. The kikes do this, telling jokes, like anti-Semitic jokes.
Yeah. I mean, they have Hitler on the t-shirt a lot of the time, but they're like, again, it was mostly the gypsy thing we like.
So anyway, so these guys are put in charge of especially the provinces that are closer to the Donbass or over the Donbass area. And then there is like unrest in the pro-Russian regions, especially in also in Kharkov, but especially in Luhansk and Donetsk. And so then the coup government sends in the Ukrainian army. Yeah. And you could see, like, you go back to the record and you'd see these Russian-speaking, whatever you call it. I mean, they're Ukrainians, but they're Russian-speaking, right? Because it's a multi-ethnic country. Lying on the ground to keep the Ukrainian troops from coming into their village, to keep the APCs from going into their village. And they wouldn't run them over. And this is an extremely demoralized army. It's still very demoralized.
Yes.
These are recruits, and these were not people fired up by murderous like hatred of anybody who speaks Russian or has Russian blood, which is destroying the white race. These were just regular recruits. So they were eventually pulled out. And the separatists were able to start setting up kind of separate structures a bit there with Russian help. There's no doubt. And then who did they send in? And this is why they did it. They sent in the volunteer battalions, as they're called.
Exactly. The regional battalions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And AKA Nazis.
Yes, Nazis. Because Nazis will kill. They would have run them over without even thinking twice about it. That's why they're useful.
In fact, if you watch, I was watching a documentary about the second battle of Donetsk airport, and you see these Ukrainian army commanders being like, yeah, we're really lucky that we had these ideological groups, and they name them. They talk about Azov and right sector, because those people were actually like fired up to fight. I mean, to really think about this for a second. I mean, for a lot of these people, for your average Ukrainian in the army there, they're asking you to drive an APC into a town in your country filled with civilians in your country, people who you view very likely as like your fellow countrymen.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be a hesitation before you pull that trigger. For a lot of these guys who are football hooligans, criminals, and, you know, sort of supreme overall, insane, bloodthirsty neo-Nazis.
Well, they've been
not only going to pull the
trigger.
Exactly.
Right?
They're not going to pull the trigger. They're going to double tap you. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, and that's why you start to see them, because they're useful, and we're seeing them again all over again. You know, it's like Syria. Oh, you know, I think ideally the West would have liked a bunch of pro-neoliberal, Soros reading fighters to be fighting as a Free Syrian Army, but who actually fought? It was the craziest, most ideological Salafi Islamists, not like. Right? Not like the neoliberal, educated middle class types.
Yeah.
That's who kills. That's who does the dirty shit. So that's how things went really ugly. And my memory of the first part of the war, which ended like that summer, was that, I mean, although Ukraine didn't win, of course, because the pro-Russian separatists did carve out a part, but the Ukraine's won some, like they won at Slavyansk, which is a big battle there.
Yeah.
And they were kind of defeating the pro-Russian rebels for a while. And so then they had a ceasefire that was backed by Russia, France, Germany, and Ukraine. It was like those four major actors. That's Minsk 1.
Yeah.
And it didn't hold up well. That was like put into effect in the fall.
It fell apart while they were like literally the ink wasn't dry and people were shooting still.
And like the pro-West side, the pro-Ukraine side says, I think a lot of it had to do with Donetsk people still trying to retake the Donetsk airport. That was like its own major battle. And as you said, huge. It was Nazis. And it's like a video game, that one. I mean, it's so fucking
insane videos from that. Yeah.
I know. And that broke out into open warfare. I think the Ukrainians, and Poroshenko was president by this point. Poroshenko, who was an oligarch, a billionaire, nicknamed Willy Wonka, because a lot of his money was in chocolate and confectionery.
He's a chocolate guy,
right. So that second war broke out, and that time the pro-Russian forces just destroyed the Nazis and whatever the Ukrainians had. And I think the
embarrasses them.
Yes, like in Debaltseve, including a lot of American mercenaries, these kind of like American, diaspora. The Ukrainian diaspora is like generally a lot more right-wing than everything in Ukraine, except like the craziest people in Lviv, and now they call it Lviv. I call it Lvov because that was his Jewish name, or Lemberg, I think. When
Lemberg. I'm a Lemberg man.
I'm a Lemberg fan. And just destroyed them and killed a lot. And the state was failing really badly. They were trying to institute, as you said, just radical 90s style neoliberal reforms. So it was like everything just got hollowed out, gutted. Corruption came back very quickly. And they had to sign a humiliating peace deal. And that's Minsk 2. And part of the Minsk 2 is, I mean, the main part really, I would say, isn't just, ceasefire, still is one, the main part, the main bone of contention is that Ukraine would federalize and devolve a lot of local powers to the Luhansk and Donetsk regions so that they would be highly autonomous regions, but they would stay within Ukraine, and Ukraine then would also be able to take over the borders and take control of the borders. And, Ukraine, or let's say the West claims, or the US, Reuters, whatever, claims that the big sticking point is that Russia won't admit it's been backing the separatists. And that's just kind of like, that's just obvious BS. Any president who tries to actually implement Minsk to any Ukrainian president is going to get shot.
I mean, they're saying that's the thing is any actual steps towards devolution in the East there. I mean, you're signing your own fucking death.
It means you've lost. It means admitting you lost.
Yeah,
exactly. But it's also, I mean, that's sort of the funny sticking point, because I believe if that did happen, which I don't think it will be. I think there's I mean, my best guess is there's going to be a sort of like a Transnistria type situation for the foreseeable
frozen
future.
Conflict, right?
Exactly. But if it does happen, I mean, that will empower, I think, the ultranationalists not only like empower them to, maybe start killing more people, but also I'm sure we'll give them a lot more political power, because that is essentially
they'll do a coup.
That's
pretty simple. They will. Now I don't know how successful. It's hard to say.
Yeah,
it would turn into civil war there. It'd be like, what would happen if Israel started giving up just the occupied territories?
Exactly. Yeah.
Civil war.
Fight.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. Fight.
Yeah. There was like recently, Danilov, he's the foreign minister, I think, in Ukraine. Yes. He gave this
No. Danilov is the head of the Security Council.
Sorry, head of security. Yeah. Excuse me. He gave this really bizarre interview in the AP, I think just a couple days ago or in late January, but he said this quote: "The fulfillment of the Minsk agreement means the country's destruction. It's impossible to implement those documents," which is just a really insane admission, because also, to be clear, like the Minsk agreement was, there was like a UN resolution, like everyone, even the US voted saying that Minsk had to be like ratified. I mean, it's not under the UN, but there was a UN resolution that everyone voted. It was a unanimous resolution that every part of Minsk had to be implemented.
The OSCE was part of it, which we're part of. The OSCE is like, I mean, I was looking back and thinking about Obama again. And I think Obama, because it was under Obama that, Nuland got to play and have her color revolution. And then all of a sudden things went to shit fast.
Yes.
I mean, the defense secretary at the time, what the hell's his name? Chuck, oh God. Anyway, they were just about to implement in February of 2014, like the largest cutback in the Pentagon budget and arms.
That's right.
And so on, since World War II, the largest one, and that went out the door. And Obama saw. I bet you Obama was told by the Newlands, Russia can't do it, and these people are for freedom, and blah, blah, blah. No one really told them the consequences. Like suddenly Russia took Crimea, and you denounce it and so on, but you're not going to go to war for it. And remember, Obama at this point, after Libya, was like, "Don't do stupid shit," was his one guiding thing. So he was always passive aggressive. Like he'll do bad things in Syria, but not all the way. He'll do bad things in Ukraine, but not all the way.
Toe.
Yeah. And
weighted it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Minsk too, because the U.S. is always the most powerful force, at least on this side, was like just admitting we ain't going to do anything, and so you need to come to an agreement. Well, and the other thing about Minsk too is not just that it's an admission of defeat, which will piss off every veteran, and that country is armed to the teeth and with veterans.
It's rife with veterans.
Yes, like every fascist revolution, but also. It would mean that Ukraine could never now, like structurally enter NATO, because structurally, like power would be so devolved to these regions that were, too closely aligned with Russia. Even though the country would be whole, like it would kill it. They couldn't go into NATO, and they shouldn't, and they won't, and no one will admit it. But in any event, like. We can't say these things.
They have to keep the dream alive.
Yeah, keep the dream alive. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this sort of brings us, I mean, we've been at the present day for a second, but like, we've got Zelensky here as president. He was sort of elected as, I mean, he's a Russian speaker. He's a Jew. Same
Come on,
thing.
He's a clown.
Yeah,
the man to mention that he's a clown.
Yes, he is. He's a clown. He is a.
As a former clown, I want to say I'm very happy to see representation on the world stage for former clowns.
Yes.
Well, he actually. I mean, it's a pretty ingenious way of getting elected, because he played the president on a kind of comedy television show called Servant of the People.
It's on Netflix. The first episode's really good, actually. I don't know if you've seen it. It's really good.
Then his political party that he starts is also called Servant of the People. Yes. And so all of the advertising and the television show itself, which is a huge success.
The most popular show by far.
Exactly.
It's about a guy who's a nobody who kind of like, it's like a very Gogolian kind of story, right? Who just sort of winds up accidentally becoming president of this incredibly corrupt, oligarch-run, dysfunctional country.
Exactly. And so, I mean, you couldn't think of a more, I mean, and if you watch the sort of election videos of him, or like on the campaign show, he seems, very earnest and kind of like not really thinking.
He still kind of does, I think.
Yeah, I think he does
He's
too.
He's likable. hard not to,
he's eminently likable. He's also much like Putin. He's 5'7".
Yeah, I was going to say slight man.
Although I mean, there's no way that Putin's not. If you're saying 5'7", both of these guys on the internet, both of these
platforms.
guys are 5'3".
Oh yeah, Putin wears major lifts.
Yeah, Putin is the size of the famous circus performer Mishu, if you look that up, which would be about 2'2". But yeah, you can't help it. And he's like, we're gonna get peace, like, because that I mean, that's a pretty popular notion for a lot of people over there. And then what happens is absolutely none of that. I mean, his popularity, which starts out super high, is now, I mean, he makes Joe Biden look like trying to think of someone who's popular.
Franklin Roosevelt,
Pamela Anderson. Oh no, I was just saying popular in general, like someone everyone kind of like likes. But yeah, I guess Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah, Lady Di. Yeah. And it's because not only, I mean, he has managed to piss off, kind of inadvertently in some cases, every single constituency which might possibly back him.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, he is
it's a shit show. I mean, look, again, we have to go back, this back and forth in these Ukrainian elections, like somebody is elected to be pro-Russian, goes the other way, then turns pro-Russian, revolution, turns pro-Russian, revolution. What happened there? Poroshenko, like they even got rid of the hardest core pro-Russian voting regions. So as I say, I think a lot of nationalists wanted Crimea out. Wanted Donetsk out. I mean,
so
I've read their articles.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. Because they're like,
that makes sense
our problem is, they really believe the problem is Russianness. And if we could extirpate, if we could lustration, the whole list, if we could cleanse, these are the words they use, this culture of Russianness, we won't have corruption, we won't have bad presidents. All of our problems are because this Asiatic gene that has infected pure Ukrainians, it's really gross, but that's it. So Poroshenko, runs the country with huge Western backing, billions. It's like a Yeltsin thing again. Yeah. And everything goes to complete shit, so that by the 2019 election, even without the hardest core pro-Russian regions, Zelensky, who campaigns on peace with Russia and let's accommodate the Russians and speaking Russian, and so on, which, like, if you really hated a country, like, you didn't want to hear people speaking German or Japanese in World War II in this country, right? I mean, like, if you hated them, you wouldn't even want to hear the language. This guy ran on that language in a historically anti-Semitic country. He's a Jew. And I mean, this was like the most unbelievable rejection of the Maidan Revolution you could possibly imagine, that Poroshenko lost 75% to 25%.
Yeah, just humiliation.
I mean,
total humiliation.
Yes. Nothing like it in Ukrainian history. Yeah. Like, only fixed elections, you have to have a dictator fixing elections to get that. And what happens? I mean, he's a novice. He had Ihor Kolomoisky backing him. I think the West was always very ambivalent. They didn't know what to do about Zelensky because we talk about democracy and elections, and and this is how we scare Putin, by having a real functioning democracy. But he, for his first year, 2019, 2020, held a lot of negotiations with Russia. He was very careful about it. He's an amateur. And civil society groups, including US backed and Omidyar backed groups, after he won, they put out, I could find it somewhere, they put out this big statement that said, basically, if you try to do the Minsk agreement, if you go too far away from us, who democratically totally lost and have been rejected, but we have power anyway, there will be another Maidan revolution. They were totally open about it, including Western governments. It was fucking crazy.
And there was also threats, like, internally. I mean, like, Poroshenko backers and Bandera guys are constantly, I would say, a looming threat for Zelensky, for, like, then it's just a different type of color revolution that he could encounter. And, like, I mean, I felt, Brace and I were talking about this, like, before, that we kind of, like, feel for him a little bit.
Totally.
Oh, I fully feel for him.
Yeah. And, like, I think, it's like Trump tried to bully him with the Biden stuff, which was very funny.
So mean. So mean.
I think Zelensky, like, kind of, like, he's a novice. He's like a bit, he's very green. I think he thought Biden would be a bit different. And it's just been like a total disaster.
He's been rat fucked again.
They're talking shit on him in the press. They're like, this guy's weak. He's a pussy. He sucks.
Yeah. They literally called him annoying and infuriating. It's like
Isn't
so
that
insane.
the most anti-Semitic trope
well,
on earth?
I was going to say,
as a Jew,
we are like that though, Mark. Like, we are annoying.
But that's only between us.
Then,
yeah.
It feel for him. But then also he does a bunch of really stupid fucking shit. Like last year when this whole thing with, this, leading up to the tensions now started, like he was fucking bloviating and saying all this insane shit about how Ukraine was gonna fucking take back Crimea. It's like, sorry, what? Like, and I remember when he came, it was like in April, I think it was like February or April of last year.
I think.
Yeah, he starts saying all this crazy stuff. And I remember watching it and being like, what the fuck is this guy doing?
I
like,
know.
Is he out of his mind?
Total change. Like total.
It was like,
change. He went to bed, somebody zapped his brain and he woke up like
I mean, and he was like threatening. He's like, Ukraine, we are building troops. We are taking this back. Like, you better watch out, Russia. We're coming for you. And the West has us back. And we're joining NATO. Did you know? We're joining NATO.
Well, all right. So that I want to pause on that for a second because you can really trace a lot of the like Russian troop buildup to a very specific thing, which is Zelensky basically like making steps.
Yes.
Ukraine has been making steps to join NATO for a long time. It's not going to happen. Yeah. But, he like commissioned this thing, like a new, like sort of, I can't remember what it was exactly. But he basically
they put out a National
government
Security Council kind of like whole, like a policy document.
Yeah.
That's
and right at the same time in tandem with the Atlantic Council putting out and getting all their heavyweights, former ambassadors. I mean, these were guys directly connected to Blinken's group, saying we need to heat everything up and fast track Ukraine, accession into NATO and kill Nord Stream 2.
We haven't even talked about that.
That's a whole other thing. The gas pipeline and just heat everything up because America's back and we can do this and it's going to happen. Like everyone's going to just bow to us because we're back, baby. And then what does he do in February? Also, he arrests. So what happened in December was polls were coming out, or even maybe a little before, showing that since he was failing and things were going bad, the pro-Russian opposition party in parliament, Our Platform for Life, headed by a guy who's everybody knows actually is close to Putin, Viktor Medvedchuk, he's also an oligarch, is polled #1 in the country.
Right? Yeah, this is pretty big.
It's pretty bad. So Biden wins the election.
Maybe they do need fascism.
I know. So Biden wins the election, and Zelensky sends his former prime minister, it's Honcharuk, that's right, sends Honcharuk to America to start like whipping up, trying to coordinate like a new policy. Honcharuk, like I should text you this article. Like Honcharuk was famous because a year before, while prime minister, he attended an actual neo-Nazi skinhead like hardcore concert, went up on stage to raise money for like Azov and C-14.
Incredible.
And he's the guy that went around and he published something in like the national interest and said, we got to take a harder line. And the Biden administration's like, this guy was just at that skinhead concert. Let's do it, man. Whatever he says.
He knows what he's talking about.
Like, obviously. he likes Combat 18, the fucking
He cried when Screwdriver Singer died. I mean,
okay, all right. Well, all right. They are a good band. So
I know they're a better band.
They're the only actual good Nazi band.
I know. So in February, he arrests Viktor Medvedchuk for being a traitor, starts shutting down opposition media, arresting bloggers. Everybody is suddenly treasonous. And what does the U.S. know? The U.S. comes out, Biden, and says, we support all these moves. Russian disinformation is evil and so on, right? So
Ukraine needs to take a stand.
Yeah, exactly. Atlantic Council, like there's just a lot of talk out of the centers of power that Russia would know to look at and to see what are we going to expect. And just realize like, it's the same shit again, but even worse now. And like, fuck this. And so in March and April, as NATO starts doing more exercises in the Black Sea and everybody's being more provocative, Russia starts its buildup. Its buildup starts in earnest. And I mean, the buildup that is only being talked about now is from April. Is like March and April.
It's
really,
the same. It's the same buildup.
It's the same. It hasn't, substantively
and it was
changed.
in response to basically,
we're going to go to war and retake this.
Saying, okay, we're retaking Donbass, and NATO starting insane exercises in the Black Sea and on the border. I mean, that's like what it was in response to.
I think with the exercise, I mean, NATO's been doing exercises on Russia's doorstep for quite a while. I mean, there was sort of but like, I think the real thing that like the most important part of what you just said though is like, the president of Ukraine said he's going to invade an area that is now part of Russia. Yeah. Like, no shit, there's going to be a troop buildup.
Yeah.
Like, Crimea is not like the Donbass. Like Crimea is like
they couldn't do Donbass. They'd still get their asses kicked if Russia got involved. But like Crimea is impenetrable.
But it's also just literally part of Russia now.
Yes,
it's not like a part of Ukraine that broke away. It's like no, it is part of the Russian country. And frankly, Russia's done a pretty good job there. They put in a shit ton of money. They built a new fucking bridge. Like life in Crimea now is better than it was before Russia took Crimea. They're smart about it. They fucking just funneled a ton of fucking money.
That's why they voted for it. They always knew it would be. They've been trying to get into Russia for 30 years. And
so like it's like, well, okay. Say you are Vladimir Putin. You know what? No. Say you're just like some moron who's the president. You don't have to be Putin. You have to have this backstory here. You control Crimea. Other country that used to control Crimea is like, we're going to invade Crimea. Yeah, you'd put some troops there maybe to dissuade them from doing it.
Yeah.
And their response is like, I mean, to be fair to Zelensky a little bit, is like, he basically is like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Good. No, sorry.
No, it's like the Russian
Didn't know
response,
you had those guys.
Even that buildup was like, it's not that significant. I mean, even now they've said it's not like this, which we'll get to the use of imminent here in a second. Imminently, we'll talk about imminent.
Well, that's no such word.
The buildup of the troops is not enough to actually invade. Like it's not. I mean, and even the Ukrainians admit that. They say, "Oh, it would take like 3 to 5 days if they actually wanted to invade." There's not enough here for that to actually happen.
Well, they'd need to
because they're annoying. Yeah. They're just being annoying.
Yeah, totally. But it was enough to basically calm Zelensky down and get him off whatever ledge whoever propped him up on. And that's what made then what was so funny when the Western press came out, and it was October of last year, 2020, that the Washington Post, I think it was the first outlet, it reported that there was now an imminent Russian threat on the border of Ukraine and Russia, and that there was a quote, "A renewed buildup of Russian troops near Ukrainian border has raised concern among some officials who are tracking what they consider to be irregular movements," blah, 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 this whole thing.
Always,
that, it was all very confusing because it is referring to just what's always been there since April. There was no renewed thing. But this is when the Biden White House really deploys the use of imminent into the diplomatic discourse.
Right.
And it just gets repeated ad nauseum. There's an imminent threat. Biden sees an imminent threat. The CIA has an imminent threat. There was these images that the CIA was passing around. They did a little bit of a tour of Europe when they were trying to drum up support for, I don't know what, invasion of Russia. I don't know. It's unclear exactly. But they were trying to drum up support. And they had these satellite images of what they called irregular troop buildups of the imminent threat. And maybe you've seen, they were in like the New York Times, they all publish them or whatever. And they were just, I mean, the CIA is so fucking lazy. They were literally just satellite images of fixed, like, they're basically like, it's a bunch of troops. It's showing a bunch of things. And what they had cropped out just east of it were barracks and like fixed facilities, like shit that had been there for like a fucking decade. None of it was new. And they had cropped it out. And the fucking CIA director is like running around Germany being like, see, no one's biting.
It's amazing how many times they've been caught lying. I mean, we can go back and back and back. Like the last 20 years, they really are not so good. We're so bad at lying now that the W campaign to convince people to back the Iraq war looks like just a total genius, like propaganda, because it took a while. And today they're fucking sloppy. But what they can do is completely. I mean, we think the internet empowers us, and in some ways, maybe it kind of does because we at least can get our voices heard. But they have the resources to flood information space with multi-dimensional bullshit. And what you talked about there with the satellite, like one thing I'm thinking of, there's all these Twitter accounts. And I bet you know this also from Syria. They're like these kind of open source Twitter accounts, and they'll show like, these units are moving from here to here. This unit was filmed by somebody moving. This can only mean one thing. And you flood people with OSINT, total OSINT. Yeah. Blech. I mean, it's like Bellingcat is kind of at the top of that pyramid. And, but there are a lot of groups, especially, basically wherever NATO is interested in, they happen to be like looking at that area, and they amplify the shit out of this. And then regular people who are interested in it, and you can't really fact check. It looks like when you see Twitter account after a Twitter account with a lot of followers that does produce actually useful information at times, saying this, here's this and here's this and here's this, and it can only mean one thing. It starts to fuck with your head, and you start thinking, maybe this time I'm wrong. Yeah. And it's like, I think they really have the information. The internet age propaganda down.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, like,
smart about it, but they have the flood power.
The thing is like, okay, yeah, but also there's troops on the Russian border. Well, that makes sense. It's their border, like it's in their country.
I know that's always the weirdest thing.
But people don't think that way.
I know. Obviously, I mean, it was like there is. In fact, I would say it's like. Compared to NATO exercises in Estonia, which, by the way, my whole thing with NATO is unless you're touching the North Atlantic, you shouldn't be able to be in NATO. It's like my thing with the Bay Area. If you're closer to another, how about this? If you're touching another body of water that's not the North Atlantic, you shouldn't be able to be in NATO. And yes, I know that cuts NATO severely down in size.
As it should.
If you're touching like the Mediterranean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Part of the Mediterranean is the Atlantic.
Is this the Mediterranean Treaty Organization?
Exactly.
I didn't hear that.
Which, by the way, that would be a force to be reckoned with. But like there's actual, NATO conducting military exercises directly on Russia's border is so much more of a provocation than Russia sending troops internally within its own borders of its own sovereign country. Yes, there might be troops on their border, probably because you are stationing troops also on their border. It's really that fucking simple. Like it's not.
And it's all because Putin can't handle a Jeffersonian democracy.
I know. He just doesn't. He hates a parliament.
I want to say too, to be clear, I don't even think NATO, aka the U.S., whatever. They don't want a war with Russia. I don't think they want a war with Russia. And like I said, DOD, regardless of what I don't think the State Department actually knows this, but the Pentagon at least, and again, they've admitted that they could not win a war, a land war with Russia unless it went nuclear. And then again, like I said, no one wins.
Not unless you do it first.
But even then,
but you never know.
Some people like living underground.
We should talk about what they do want, because there is a reason why they are doing this. And I think that it's pretty clear. The idea is that they want to provoke Russia into invading Ukraine to get pretext to pass an insane package of sanctions in order to isolate Russia. And
get Nord Stream canceled.
Canceled, which is part of it. Now
you're canceled, sis.
There's so much to fucking talk about. I'm going to see how quickly I can do this without getting too far into the weeds. But I will say, why are they afraid of Russia? Why do they want to isolate Russia with sanctions, right? We've talked about how sanctions packages work on the show before in the context of Russia and in the context of Iran, and that it's not just being like, well, we're not going to give you money. It's like trying to basically set up blockades so that capital and just cash cannot move in other countries, to completely freeze them out of the global market. Like that's the idea. And again, Putin, seeing what happened to the country in the 90s and seeing what it was going to have to, like, the kind of long march it would take to get Russia basically off the dollar. I mean, that's the goal, right? So it doesn't have to be dependent on the West in any kind of capacity. The U.S. passing these sanctions packages has kind of like adversely propelled Russia toward that goal totally. Much quicker than the U.S. probably wanted. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So it pushes Russia further into like autarky, meaning that it, being completely on it, completely and totally like
self-reliant, like a man should be.
Yeah. But also more and more closer to China. And that is the complete opposite of the goal of what the U.S. wants. What the U.S. wants is to isolate Russia away from China. And so it can kind of attack both, on their own. I think there's still kind of, again, these like kind of, the slow march of these bureaucracies into their gravestones. Like they're all kind of have these same approaches of the kind of old school Soviet isolate and contain, encircle and contain strategy for these countries that just is they've come up with countermeasures. It's just not going to work.
That in particular is so ridiculous because, I mean, a real stroke of luck for the U.S. During the Cold War was the falling out between China and the Soviet Union. Yeah. I mean, the world would look very, very differently if some things different things had happened back then. If some cooler heads had prevailed, and if Khrushchev hadn't lied. Like he did.
He's Ukrainian, by the way.
What's up?
He's Ukrainian, by the way.
Yeah,
Khrushchev.
yeah.
God
also,
damn it.
Yeah, well, there you fucking go. Yeah.
Wily.
And a bit of a fibber. So, it's sort of, it's insane to me that they would basically push them together like this. I mean, just in terms of, from their perspective. But it also gives, I guess, it gives you an enemy to fight too. It's Russia and China sort of putting them together as a block. I mean,
I don't think the U.S. wants that.
I think they're just. I think you're right, Liz. I mean, they're so fucking dumb. Like, there are people. I remember even in the middle of Russiagate, in the middle of like crazy story after crazy story about Russia controlling the world and doing this. The New York Times at one point, it's like somebody like woke up one morning like, holy shit. I just had a thought. Russia should be our ally, and I think this is kind of the Trump nationalist idea too, and some realist. Russia should be our ally because China is actually super strong and is stronger than Russia, and so we need to be allies with them. And they published an actual editorial, and it was one of the most schizophrenic editorials. It's like Russia's really bad. It's in the New York Times in like 2018 or 19.
Yeah.
And it was like, Russia's really bad and evil, but China is a much more serious threat. Russia needs to realize that its interests, this is what they always say, its interests are really with the West. And so they need to stop, they need to stop pissing us off. Also, Russia's super weak and needs to get over the thought that it's super powerful and it can't really do anything. So if it hooks up with China, it's just going to be China's little bitch, and China's autocratic and is not going to respect Russia. So really, Russia, you're weak and you need to be with us. So come on over. And then the next day it's like Vladimir Putin again, spreading authoritarianism around the world. Like, I think they're actually just completely fucking schizophrenic. And they're not, when's the last time any faction or people suffered consequences for fucking up foreign policy over and over and over.
I mean, look at the State Department.
Nobody.
You're talking about post-Mao China, right? Because those people never did either.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing is like, guys, I thought we were supposed to be pivoting to Asia. This is the pivot to Eurasia. I'm not trying to get involved in any of that. I'm trying to die in the South China Sea. Over an island made entirely of concrete that has like one prop plane on it. That to me is an important matter of national security.
And Russia and China's partnership is real and is like a real deal. Like just today, just this morning, we had the I don't know. I didn't watch it, so perhaps there was a gong involved, but I don't know.
Whoa.
I was gonna say proverbial gong to welcome in the Winter Olympics in Beijing, and who was there right before huge press conference? Putin and Xi. With a big statement.
Yeah. Also, first foreign leader that Xi has met with in 2 years, which little blue pill on COVID there.
Well, yeah. Well, and the Olympics are crazy. China has a zero COVID policy, very famously.
Right.
Yeah.
But their partnership has been going on for a long time. Although I think again, the West has been. First of all, they won't report on it because I think they're afraid of it. But also, they're not really sure how for real it is. I think there's a really because access to China is so limited, and I don't think they have a lot of people in Russia. The West is really, I think in the dark.
In denial.
In denial. Yeah, and I mean, look, it's been a couple years now that Russia and China have been buying and selling oil to each other, not in the petrodollar, which is a big fucking deal. They have, like I said, increased like massive trade with one another. They have made pretty strong statements towards an official military alliance, although it seems like it's going there, but it hasn't been officially announced. It seems like all arrows are pointed that way. And, I think this morning, the two of them really reaffirmed. I mean, look, they said in the statement, they were like, Russia has made these demands to get the West to back off on the Ukrainian border. They want no more expansion of NATO. They want a removal of all NATO forces from Eastern Europe. They want no NATO exercises near borders. They want no U.S. nukes in Europe. They want a retraction of the 2008 invitation to Ukraine and Georgia. They want legally binding agreements that no strike systems will be deployed near Russia. They want to have regular military talks. And China was like, we support them in all of their, in all of the requests that they've made to every NATO member. And we, affirm their right to whatever. I mean, it's like a very strong statement, again, on the eve of, the fucking Olympics, one of the biggest fucking deals on the world stage. Yeah. So it seems pretty clear that regardless of what the West thinks or is in denial about, like, this shit is real. It's happening. It's not going anywhere. And it's the year of the fucking tiger, baby.
It's been. I totally agree, and it's a process that's been going on. In a lot of ways, it's a lot deeper than people realize because this is a relationship between two big powers that share some common experiences in like the world and the humiliation from the West and so on, and that are not natural allies. I mean, that's why even when both were communist, I mean, the Russians don't. I would say the Russian elite always generally wants to be part of the West. Yeah. But they understand it ain't going to happen unless they're completely subordinate. Like, America has this idea that is as deeply held Orthodox faith as I imagine they believed in Christianity, 700-800 years ago, which it's the world, which is that there cannot be a country powerful enough to buck American hegemony, because American hegemony is benevolent. Ultimately, whatever our little problems and little freckles, it is benevolent, and any other country is only going to introduce essentially chaos in that world. And we can't lose that power. I mean, I think this is so deeply held Orthodox faith, so that we don't understand that forces Russia and China to, through common interest and common experience, to come together. And what they've been doing over the last 15 years is doing like slow steps towards each other. And it's all been about like confidence building or, trust building. And they've been coming through for each other over and over and over. Yeah. Because it's not culturally a natural deep fit, but it's in a lot of ways, it's much more than that. They're driven together by common experience. They're two rising powers, and the U.S. just as a like motor function reflex, will try to subvert and undo any challenger anywhere. That's just how it is through whatever weaponry it has, whether it's the financial system, the NGOs, you know, whatever the hell it can do, propaganda, and it's good at some of those things, still propaganda. It's just, it's forcing them together. Yeah, you're the tiger, baby.
You mentioned
the dragon rises.
Yeah.
You mentioned the shared humiliation. I think too that it's also the shared. I mean, the shared, I would say, mutual respect for how they rebuild their countries. Right. Like, regardless of how, you know, I don't know, without evaluating like China as like, you know, a pure communist or however, you know.
Okay. Well, I think that's fair to evaluate them as such. And
well, no, I just mean not in this episode.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's clearly a common respect there for, you know, the growth that's happened under Putin and under Xi. I mean, the middle class in China is so fucking massive at this point. The home ownership rates are like 95%. It's like, you know, they've got their own issues right now with the housing market, but it's really fascinating to see how they're responding, which is basically the opposite of how the U.S. responded when it faced a similar crisis. And so I think that
just like the pandemic.
Very much so. And so I think there's a very, you know, very much a shared respect there. And you see it when you watch, you know, I encourage people, again, if you don't know how to, like, you know, it's difficult to evaluate who to read and where to get sources and all of that. But like one of the first places to start is like read the diplomatic statements, like read what these guys are saying, because especially in the case of Russia and China, it's not the case with the US, which we should say the State Department is out of their fucking minds and just like a bunch of children. But you read these diplomats from China and from Russia, and these are serious guys. You know, they're professionals, and the way that they talk about these things, you can kind of read between the lines. And I mean,
practical too.
I think the thing that the US is afraid of is very much happening.
Totally. And they're making it happen, right? Like they're making their nightmares come true. Like it's so fucking ridiculous. Like even just the Ukraine, you know, crisis. I mean, they're saying Russia's trying to destabilize Ukraine, and all this propaganda campaign, this psychological war operation aimed, I don't know, really at us, I think. It is. All it's done is totally subvert Ukraine. I mean, you know, who knows? I'm sure there are parts of the U.S. government that would like Zelensky overthrown a coup, and there is a threat that he could be overthrown in a coup. There was a move to impeach him this summer, and then Poroshenko, the previous, you know, Willy Wonka oligarch president, came back and he was arrested by Zelensky just a month ago as a Russian traitor. Things are fucking crazy there right now.
The economy is tanking.
I mean, the thing is too, like Zelensky, and we got to wrap up kind of soon, but with Zelensky, I mean, you know, you can sort of see there was that sort of barrage of statements from him and people in his government about how there is no actual imminent invasion.
Over and over.
Over and over, like saying like, oh, this isn't actually, like, the situation has not changed. Meanwhile, the US, Australia, Canada, other countries, I can't remember who else were, but one or two other countries, England, were taking their diplomatic personnel out. They were taking the embassy families out. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, this is very far from any potential, even imaginary front lines. Like, it is so beyond, even if there was, like, again, I don't think it's not going to happen, but even if there was somehow an invasion, there's people would not be threatened, and they're taking them out,
and they wouldn't be evacuated like that. Like
exactly,
you know what I mean? It's so
like
obviously
not even
propaganda.
A good show.
Exactly. Like they could
it's
literally
all for domestic. That's it. It's just for us.
It's
for us Americans watching at home.
But for Ukrainians, it's causing panic in the country. It's fucking up the market. It's fucking up Zelensky's popularity.
Zelensky's rule.
Exactly. It's subverting Zelensky's rule. And you know what? The thing is like, like my view is what Putin, I mean, probably the best he knows he can get now is a weak Ukraine that's like in too chaotic a state to ever actually like join NATO or anything. That is which essentially serves as like a dysfunctional buffer, right?
Yep.
But what the U.S. is doing is they are helping create that situation.
Yep.
And so it is
sacrificing
totally
Ukrainians.
Exactly. And Ukraine, a country of millions and millions and millions of people, being used as this like basically like political pawn by, well, kind of by everybody, but like, you know, it really just being offered up as just like, you know, we are essentially like grinding our sword against the whetstone of Ukraine. And it is fucking that country up very badly.
I mean, in a sense, the U.S. is kind of like, I noticed one thing in Russia when I got there. In the U.S., a lot of bar fights don't really happen, but they're dudes screaming until their necks turn red, ripping off their shirts. Come on, I'll fuck you. And they're mostly yelling, but it doesn't happen. And in Russia, like that would just be weird. You just punch if you're going to fight, you know? And I remember once an American guy, about a year or two after I got there, I mean, I saw that happen. It was like the American way versus the Russian way. Some guy at one of the few bars there in the mid-90s was like, come on, dude, I'll fuck you. And the Russian guy was just staring at him and just went, pop, and just popped the dude. Like, you know, and I think this time the America was like woofing loudly, NATO, we don't care about Russia. And they woofed and woofed. And so Russia's like, okay, we're going to move a whole bunch of troops up and probably send out disinformation or whatever about an invasion. And we're also going to find out some of your methods and sources by doing that. And basically said, okay, if you're going to do that, and then sent a letter and said, if you do that, it means war. For us, we know this is an existential issue. And I think this has broad support. Like, Russians don't want a war in Ukraine, but if Russia were to join, if Ukraine were to join NATO, I think broad support
chance.
For
you'd have,
like you have opposition and everybody, right? And so it's not just like Putin the evil who does it.
No,
and so by heating up the situation, then the U.S. is like, all right, you want to heat stuff up? We'll heat up. You know, we know how to really heat up the psychological warfare space. Russia's really going to do it. Russia's really doing it. And Russia just kind of sat back and watched. And everybody, and everybody could then kind of see what's actually
like
going to happen.
Paper tigers.
And what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And Biden had to come out in a press conference because they convinced themselves. I think like Biden believes there will be an invasion.
He
I
know
do.
What day?
Well, he doesn't know much. I know, but I'm just saysaying like
on my
5 minutes
I'm sure
before.
he does.
Okay.
Yeah.
My child has friends there.
It's true though. And then, you know, I mean that the US basically got its ass handed to it on the world stage. And what's that?
You look like a pussy.
Jen Psaki or whatever, the horrible woman. She basically had to come out and admit defeat. She was like, oh, we shouldn't use imminent. That was giving the wrong impression.
Turns out there is a word for that in Ukrainian.
So we're not going to use imminent anymore, which that is just basically admitting defeat.
That's like okay,
it's
so
over.
it's
Show's over.
Yeah.
But Russia, to their credit, they're like, okay, we're not letting this go. We have sent letters to every NATO nation. And we want, and like, I love the letter move. They're like, we need a signed
you gotta
letter
learn
back.
from the Gorbachev years. Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
You're like, I want it in writing.
Good point.
TrueAnon life lesson. Get it in writing.
Get it in writing.
And they're saying, look, we want your commitment that, you know, that none of that your, you know, the terms in which you joined NATO will not be breached.
Yeah.
And basically, you got to write us back and let us know. And they're just sticking to it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the U.S. got very embarrassed. It doesn't seem like that sanctions package is going to pass. Germany is like, we're not doing that. France will do whatever Germany says.
Yeah.
And the whole thing just really blew up in the State Department's face.
Yeah.
Because those guys are fucking morons.
I still think, though, something crazy could... I really think the U.S. is a wild card. Something crazy could happen. The humiliation could make... all of them convince each other we have to do some big sanctions package, something fucking stupid and crazy.
Some kind of false flag.
I don't even know about a false flag. There was that possibility before, but I really think more like just a preemptive sanctioning or something where they feel like they're getting something and making the situation worse, even for America, even if you like love this country or whatever, you know, it would still ultimately backfire again, as it always has. And because they're just like on like the world's biggest losing streak since like, I don't know, the Austro-Hungarian Empire or something. Like they're losers. The people who are like running foreign policy are just serial fucking losers. They like gamblers.
Ask yourself like when was the last war America won?
Yeah.
Mind war.
That's the only way. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have to wrap up somewhere. And so I think there's a lot of stuff we could not, and I don't think we have time to get to, like Nord Stream 2. The fact that Ukraine's military is just any sort of like infographic where you see troop comparisons to Russia, there's a fraction of that amount of people actually ready in Ukraine. The Javelin missiles, which America very publicly gave them, which are just sitting in a warehouse in the west of the country because Ukraine doesn't know how to use them, and America won't let them use them because they used a couple on some fortifications in 2018, which you're not supposed to do. There's a lot there. But what I want to say, and what I want to kind of lead us out on is, really quickly, what are each of your personal peace plans for Ukraine? How could you fix this crisis?
Liz?
Well, my official position is that Ukraine should not exist. Mm-hmm. So that's what Ukraine should not exist.
What, should it be part of Russia?
It can be carved up, but then absorbed. Absorbed. No new nation, no anything. Just absorb it in. I want to say to be clear, this is not against the Ukrainian people it's against some of the Ukrainian people, but I also believe that about Canada and Australia. So I just want to make that clear.
Well, my thing with Australia is trade it to China. Taiwan, I don't want to think about Taiwan anymore. You can make that its own country or whatever, just like a zone, a free trade zone, not even a country, just like a district. But Australia can go to China. I think in a great game. They
would love
Mark,
that. They deserve it.
What's yours?
I just can't imagine a peace plan without the actual use of nukes. And I'm trying to figure out, how that works out.
Wow.
We're all going to die someday. You may as well go out in a bang.
So you think the peace plan is Israel gets more nukes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
exactly.
Interesting that you bring up peace and nukes, because I'll tell you something that could have fixed this crisis before it even started, which is Ukraine should not have given up its nukes.
Yes.
And now B, that we have never, because that's, of course, another TrueAnon thing. Never give up nuclear weapons.
Yeah, never give up the nukes.
Never give up nuclear weapons. Always, in fact, build more.
Get it in writing. Never give up the nukes.
Never give up the nukes. But my thing is now, okay, Ukraine has no nukes. Why doesn't everybody just give them one? Like, I'm talking Pakistan gives them one, U.S. gives them one. Everyone just gives them
like a Marshall Plan, but for nukes.
Yeah, just nukes. And just, in fact, why not this? All right, okay, Chernobyl aside, why don't we just make Ukraine the country that builds nukes for everyone else? That way, no one else can invade them, because, like, well, that's where we get our nukes. We can't, invade that. Plus, they could nuke us. And so I think Ukraine should just get nukes. Either that, or there should be a new language instituted. Now, I'm thinking Hebrew or Yiddish, but I think that everyone in Ukraine, Russian, Ukrainian speakers alike, should now have to speak Yiddish. And that will unify the country, because everyone will become 1,000 times more annoyed with each other.
There's a Russian saying about how tricky Ukrainians are. And so the kind of the pejorative, sort of like kike for Jew, the pejorative for Ukrainian is chachol. It's kind of gogol actually, but chachol. And the saying is где прошел chachol, евреям нечего делать. And what it means is, like when a Ukrainian comes in, even Jews can't do anything. Even Jews can't make business.
That really covers all the Russian bases for us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting back on the chopper. Not never. We're getting back in our armored personnel care. We're getting back in the Striker, and we're heading to Romania. We have with us, of course, Mark Ames from Radio War Nerd, my favorite podcast, of course, besides
thank you.
own.
You're my favorite.
And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I love you guys. And happy to talk.
Oh, I forgot. I had something to say. before we sign off. Brace. I have a plan for you.
Oh.
So remember the Belden plan?
Yeah.
But the question is not what is the Belden plan. The question is how to implement the Belden plan. Now, what we need is a TrueAnon type television series that sweeps the nation, where you play a likable but often gets into mishaps in comedic ways.
That do be happening to me, yeah.
Who finds themselves catapulted to power after kind of, I don't know what happens. We have to figure
military.
this out.
No, okay. I can tell a few because I'm a colonel in the United States military, and I and my fellow group of colonels who subscribe to my like officers program or whatever catapult me to power.
Yes, but also you're very funny, and you're like, how did I get here? But then you've got a heart of gold, and everyone. So the TrueAnon TV show sweeps the nation. Sweeps, very popular. And everyone's like, damn, this guy is so funny and cool. Wouldn't it be great if he actually just was leader?
Yeah. While this happens, I provide such good entertainment with this television show, which is on Peacock, by the way, and that the U.S. actually gives me a commission, like a kind of like a goofy commission as a colonel, like to be like a USO kind of you know, thing.
Yeah, and, for morale boosting.
But I get to talk with some of these cats. I'm like, you know, things could be really different around here.
Yeah,
like,
you got some ideas.
You know, the world needs ditch diggers. And frankly, this country doesn't have enough of them. And after that, people are like, you know what? Like my other colonels are like, we could just rip the fucking Band-Aid off this bitch. Let's get this guy in the White House.
Yeah, we got to foist him. Let's foist him up.
Because here's the thing. I've been in charge of a lot of things in my life, but I've never got to be in charge of a junta. Like everyone's just like, no, you can't be in charge of the junta, like a junta or whatever. How you ever say it? Well, whatever. I think it's junta, whatever. Well, for me, it'd be a junta because I'm an American. They've never let me be in charge of one. And so if I could do that, iron fist. Everyone's digging ditches. That's it. We're gonna crisscross this country with irrigation canals to nowhere like you've never seen before. We're gonna have the Atlantic and the Pacific meeting in the center of the country in a brackish mixture that show it's like the golden spike in the railroad that shows the new direction this country is going into.
Yes.
Confused and useless into the new millennium.
The big puddle.
The big puddle. We're gonna make this the wettest nation in history. Everyone here is gonna be soaked and moist.
I'm Liz.
My name is I like the sound of this, Colonel Belden. We are joined by the future satrap of the New Southwest, young Chomsky, who is programming this episode like he will program your children's minds. And the show is called TrueAnon.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein.